Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book from Spiramus Press. We've reviewed a number of books in the past, and this one came to us and I thought it was a fascinating book. I've always been very interested in the Equality Act 2010 and the way in which the previous Labour government, it was one of the last legislative measures that they introduced, were able to bring together all of the different pieces of legislation into one Act of Parliament. I think it's a good step forward. There's still a long way to go with discrimination, because the question really is always going to be how far can you go with any of this sort of stuff. But at least it's a step in the right direction, because discrimination is a really big issue, a very fundamental issue for everybody. We're all facing it all the time. Now, the book title is Equality and Anti-Discrimination Law, the Equality Act 2010 and Other Anti-Discrimination Protections, and it's been written by Dr. Mark Butler. As I say, it comes from Spiramus Press Limited. It's also available as a paperback and an e-book. Now, my wife Elizabeth and I have looked at this book and we gave it a title, a short and highly readable text on the current anti-discrimination protections which successive governments have given us to date. And that's really what this book is about. It's a very easy book to read. It's a paperback. It's not a big book. I have used it when I've been advising clients. There's the spine, because it has some very basic information in it. That is the back of the book there. Then there's at the back, there is a very short index. It runs to 200 pages, just over 200 pages. Spiramus have never been big on indexes, I have to say, but you've got enough there to find what you're looking for. The front of the book there, Dr. Butler is from the University of Lancaster. He's compiled, I think, a very useful book. There's a very nice dedication there, which I will just show so that you are aware of it. This is the contents section of the book, and you can see it's got a reasonably detailed content section, so you should find what you're looking for. Then there are lists of abbreviations, which I think again will be very helpful for anybody involved in this area. Then the cases listed there, and then you've got after that you then go. There are in fact some regulations and various other things mentioned in relatively short list at the beginning of cases, etc. Then you've got the introduction to equality law and where we are at the moment, because the law obviously has tried to keep up to date since we had, says here, since 1965 and the introduction of the initial Race Relations Act. Obviously things have changed a lot since then. Then you go from chapter 1 to development of non-discrimination, equality protection, and so on, and you run all the way through. What I liked about this is there's not too much heavy referencing to case law, but you do have the case law in the footnotes, and I found that quite helpful when I was looking at a particular case recently, which was actually on disability discrimination protections. There is some there's some case law mentioned as well, and of course the Disability Discrimination Act has been merged. So it's useful to keep this up to date. This is an eminently readable book, and I think it's very useful for laymen to know about as well, lay people to know about. Now, let me say what we think of this book. The 21st century was always going to offer us as private citizens much more protection against discrimination, since one of the last measures of the previous Labour government, which straddled the 2 centuries, gave us the Consolidating Equality Act 2010, which has still not gone far enough. That's my view, but certainly it's a step in the right direction, and I'm hoping we can consolidate more in the next decade. So in 2016, along comes an excellent short book from Spiramus by Mark Butler, which covers the equalities legislation both from the UK perspective and in the context of European Union law, and at a time of serious confusion as to whether Britain will remain within Europe as we reach the end of the decade. Spiramus Press rightly described the approach of successive governments as one which aims to ensure equality for the workforce, stating that they are measures which are, quote, notoriously difficult to navigate, with various aspects of protection being contained and discussed across a range of statutory and non-statutory instruments. However, what we say is that Butler gives us I feel, a concise statement in 13 chapters, both well written and easy to read for the layperson throughout. And certainly when I've used it in conference, I think the clients have found it relatively easy to follow. The Equality Act 2010 has been viewed as central to the equality laws of the UK, but there are other important areas that have to be considered, including atypical worker protection and family-friendly regulation. Each of these are discussed in sufficient detail to enable the reader to gain a working understanding of how each operates without the need for specific legal expertise. And I think we're going to see more of that. This family-friendly regulation, I do see a sea change after what frankly was the arrogance of the establishment in the past over you will do what we say and we don't take into account any other issues. Well, you've got to, and I think the general mood of the public is that there has to be more understanding of what we call this family-friendly regulation. I'd like to see more of that in the courts too, but that's another issue and another book probably. When considering every one of the key areas, Butler deciphers and navigates each of them always with the confused reader absolutely directly in mind. These protections and the thresholds that need to be satisfied to acquire them are separated into their constituent parts and then analysed using the relevant case law and codes of practice to ensure that their practical use is understood by the reader. Butler adopts, of course, this helpful approach throughout the book, allowing the reader to follow the key concepts that have been set up to protect us and to provide us with a modern equality footing after years of individual politically pressured pieces of legislation which have now been brought together under one statutory roof. And as I'm sure you're aware, it really was a question of people pressing to get specific bits onto the statute book. But so it was very much bit by bit, and what we really need now is the consolidation, and we'll need to have, I think, another look, probably in 3 or 4 years, as to the working of the current 2010 Act to see what other changes come in, because as I've indicated earlier, there will be further changes, certainly with an ageing population, with a changing demographic as well. We're going to have to think about these things in a lot of detail, because the common law, if it's anything, and statute law is actually very much reliant upon the ability to change, and that's really where we're going. The book, of course, takes account of case law from both British courts and the European courts, where the decisions are relevant without too much detail. And I think, again, that's an important point, because you don't want to be burdened with too much case law detail. It helps show the interaction that UK-wide law and EU law has in the area of equality law, and illustrates that the systems are interdependent to some extent, irrespective of any arguments about membership of the EU or anything else. The fact is that you've got to have a much more cohesive, overlapping view, and whether you're in or out of Europe is irrelevant. You're still going to need to have the basic models, and that's what we've got here. So for readers wishing to go beyond the simple practical application of the law, the guide touches upon a number of academic debates that exist in the area of equality law and will stimulate those with an interest in how the law currently works. Now, let me conclude by saying that what we particularly liked here is that the book further highlights some of the perceived weaknesses that exist in our current approach to equality protection. And yes, as the publisher says, it does whet the appetite for further discussion. And that's exactly where I think we're moving with this, because we're not finished. This is still a work in progress, I think. There's the book again, paperback. You can see the spine with the title there, and then on the back you've got some basic information, some of which I've quoted in the review. And then if you just open it, I'm opening it here on defences. General defences that apply across the Equality Act. Objective justification, for instance, that's that bit there. And as I've said right at the end, there's this useful chapter on atypical worker protection, which I think is of great use. And then do look at the concluding remarks, because that's really what I was referring to in the review about the fact that we will be revisiting this issue again. And of course, defining equality is a very important one. I have to say that I get quite a lot of clients who refer to equality and they get the wrong end of the stick. That this book will help you work out what you can and cannot pursue, and I think that that at least is where we're moving at the moment. What we would like to have is one thing, but what we really have got is what is actually set out here. So thank you very much to Mark Butler and to Spirimus for an excellent publication. Up to your usual standards, I'm very grateful to you for doing all the work. Thank you. Bye-bye.